Hello and welcome again to Language Learning Life. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about and reading a little bit from my latest book, which is actually my latest novel. I've published books of poetry as well. It's called The Queen's Apprenticeship and it's published by Transit Lounge in Australia. Also actually available as an ebook in overseas markets, but as a print novel as well in Australia. And it's a historical fiction, which is partly the story of Marguerite of Navarre, but also blended with fictional characters and a main fictional protagonist, so completely invented, called Jeanne, whose name changes in the story, at least on one occasion, and so is also called Josse. I'll just read a little from the blurb. Two women from different worlds in Renaissance France cross paths in a way that changes both their lives. One is Marguerite de Navarre, a king's sister. Powerful, privileged and widely admired, Marguerite must nonetheless marry where she is told to, regardless of her feelings. And despite the thrilling new ideas of religious reform causing upheaval in France, must toe the line for the good of her brother's kingdom. So what I'll read a little extract from then is part of Marguerite's story, where she is facing that particular need to marry where she's told. So it comes from early on in the book. The book is actually two interwoven stories, hers and the so-called commoner, Jeanne or Josse, who wants to be a printer. So we have the lives of royals and so-called highborn people, as well as people who are not wealthy or privileged. But here we're in the privileged world. Certain change came to Marguerite the following year. It was her mother who announced it, but Madame de Chatillon who tried to reconcile her to the news. Marguerite had known it was coming. These matters took a long time to be arranged and settled, but while still in process, they seemed unreal and frequently were. Every young person she knew had been promised or betrothed at some stage, only for it to be cancelled, altered, deferred. It was a shifting, pragmatic business, like so many moves at chess. But just as in chess, past a given point, you knew that no further tactic could save you. Even a fit of shock before your mother, and in the presence of the king and queen, could not spare you. The Duke of Alençon. He is most suitable, Madame de Chatillon said. Marguerite was ensconced in a window seat and would not come forth, but she turned an ear to her governess, who tried to coax her with a warm, spiced drink. How most suitable! So he is a prince of the blood, but there is nothing between us, nothing we share. Not every prospect is of such high birth and so close to you in age. That is already plenty to share. Remember, given your rank and situation, things could be very different. Alençon is not so very far away. This drew a wince from Marguerite. And you will be very comfortable there, I'm sure. As if it were a question of my comfort, you know what sort of a man he is. He never set eyes on a book if he could help it, nor any kind of picture or work of art. How should we even find matter to talk about? No, this is not about him nor me at all. Rather, it is a question of Armagnac. I can see the purpose of this, and I am to be traded as the solution to a lawsuit. The king wishes only peace and goodwill between his house and the Alençon faction, Madame pointed out. And to be the instrument of peace is surely a great calling. A great calling. Instrument was the right word. Marguerite was a piece of equipment, a thing to be played upon. Whatever sound she made would be of their choosing. If my brother were king already, she thought, he would never do such a thing to me. She had managed to avoid the English Arthur, and those two Henry Tudors, elder and younger, and now the younger Henry was king, the eighth of that name. Huge like her brother, and handsome, they said. And her ladies sometimes joked to Marguerite, Queen of England, look what you missed out on, and now they have a Spanish queen instead, who used to be his brother's. And Marguerite laughed back and said, I am sure I will not regret it. In fact, she was still glad of it. But this present matter had been finalised without her. I would rather death than Monsieur the Duke of Alençon. You don't mean that. Marguerite wept then, and Madame de Chatillon placed a hand on her back, reminding her that one or two of the ladies of her household would go with her, that things could continue just as before. Madame knew well that Marguerite felt secondary in her family, insignificant. She knew which points to press. Pardon me, my lady, but even your brother has not really the choice of his future bride. It's not only us women. It is a sign of your importance, not lack of it. The unimportant might marry where they please. We must submit to God's will, Marguerite. I don't need to tell you that. Marguerite let the point about her brother go. It was never the same for men, as Madame well knew. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve, a sleeve, even now at 17, bearing ink blemishes from her hours of scribbling. Sweet, sweet writing, her one comfort in all situations, even if nobody else ever read it. She could always retreat into that. I am the same person, she thought, as when I wrote my childish poems and ran about freely after my brother, and I shall be the same person even when forced to become Duchess of Alençon. Yes, all right. God's will. God is to be praised in all things. She stood up with abrupt resolve, and as she did so, her nose began to bleed. Now there were bright spots of red where the ink had been, and down the front of her gown. The governess fetched a cloth and made her sit again, hoping to stop the flow, but it soaked through the fabric. If I believed in omens, Marguerite said, what I said about death. But you're not superstitious, and neither am I. Unlike Madame ma mère. No, omens are nonsense. It's simply the blow to my spirit, Marguerite mused. Just like a blow to the face. I hold back tears, and so the blood will come. But I will live, and I will still be myself. Indeed. And I don't care what anyone says. I shall take my books with me. Madame de Chatillon nodded approval. So now I'll read a short section from the other strand in the book, which is the story of Jeanne, who would be a printer's apprentice, so from a very different class background in early 16th century France. But her story intertwines with Marguerite's and the adventures that she has along the way. At this point in the story, she's just abandoned or been cast out of the family home. Her mother, being a widow, has remarried, and the new family situation has not worked out well at all, and she's had her hair cropped and left in shame. She's in the town of Lyon. My hometown is a maze of towers and tunnels. Houses huddle on long streets with no side alleys leading between them. But there are covered laneways every local knows, and into one of these I made my way. In there was protection from the cool of night, and a corner in which to try to get some sleep. Since there was no light, I had to feel my way, and I soon curled up among a heap of bales made of cloth scraps and other rubbish, as if I were a nestling and not yet fledged. That nest was foul-smelling, and through the dark hours I heard scuttling, probably rats. I stayed still, as if that would repel them. Dawn crept in at the entrance to my tunnel, and with it the human scuttlers. What have we here? A fine young lady indeed. A bent old man stood over me, leering. He flicked back my hood and laughed. If it's not in fact a harlot with shorn head, or a bad lad in disguise, either way you could be useful. It is not for you to touch me, I cried, pushing him away. Despite my sore legs, I rose and bolted before he could say or do more. Out of the covered laneway and into the streets of Lyon as it woke into life, past workshops and bake shops and carts full of wares already headed for loading at the riverbank. Where would I go? And what could I do? There was punishment for vagrancy, and I knew it would not be long in finding me if I did not look like I had some purpose. Already my weak and craving stomach was betraying me. I could not go home. I could get a drink of piquet or wine, and a roll or pasty from some cook shop with the few coins I carried on me. Beyond that, how would I eat? I could wander the town all day, keeping mostly out of sight, and find another sleeping place at nightfall. But there was nothing to protect me from an intruder like the old man. And what if he'd been a younger, stronger man? Wandering was wasting time. I needed a plan if I was not to end up in trouble with the law, the lawful or the unlawful. Those swaggering boys, for instance, grinning and calling things out in their coarse, incomprehensible speech as they went down to the water. Their freedom was unquestioned. However poor and lowly, they owned the outdoor city, unlike me. It was not their strength or intelligence that gave them safe passage, I realized, for mine were equal to theirs. It was their clothing. If I were rid of smock and kirtle, long and hindering, and could cover my female nature in a shorter tunic, a pair of hose or breeches, who would know me? My legs were strong and straight enough for that, and my body almost without curves. You will say I should have known this to be unlawful, but 5 years ago as this was, that had never crossed my mind, for I had not heard of it. Once the next night fell, weak though I was from little food and drink, I crept again to the Tudor house, that's where her mother lives, to take what was mine. I would ask nothing and see nobody. I knew where to find my late father's better clothes, his spare set, stored in a chest of my mother's to be given to servants and then forgotten in the prosperity of remarriage. With the river Saône to my right and the great bridge before me, I soon saw how to find my way back there, and I knew how to enter the simple lean-to at the rear of the building where servants went in and out at all hours. All I had to do was keep watch for their comings and goings, and choose the right moment to slip in. I would make a fair exchange, my gown for his man's guise. Though it was getting to the warmer time of year, I rummaged till I found his jerkin also. Everything I could manage, for I would need it along the way. I kept my pouch of meagre coin. In it I also carried the sort, the printer's I, the letter I had kept as a token of my father. There were no shoes among his things, being already given elsewhere, so I would have to make do with my slippers. Quickly I shed my girl's garments the way it is said a soul casts off the body on its journey heavenward. Into the chest I bundled them, and I clad myself in shirt, breeches, and jerkin. They were rough and brown, for my father had owned nothing fine. But that was better, less likely to stand out. No cap, but even bareheaded, despoiled of my tresses, I was certain to pass for a boy. "Thief! Thief! How dare you come in here?" It was Barbette, one of the maids, suddenly behind me. She grabbed boldly at my collar. "I am no thief," I said, wrenching away. "I take only what is left to me." But even though I spoke, Barbette could not make out who I was. "Help! Voleur!" she cried. Far stronger than such a maid, I slipped easily from her grasp. In fact, I was now happy and confirmed in my decision. It was enough for me that she had not known me, that her word voleur showed she thought me a man. I knew I would henceforth be free. The Queen's Apprenticeship is also available in Spanish translation and will be followed by a sequel, The War Within Me.